The snow fell slowly, covering the sidewalks in a silent blanket of white. It was another freezing dawn in the heart of Alaska, where time seems to move slower, almost like him. The cafe, small and warmed by a soft amber light, turned on its lights for the first time that day. An ancient bell tinkled over the door, and with it, a man with slow steps and worn clothes crossed the threshold as he had done for years. His trembling hands held a dark wooden stick. The face, marked by time, hid in its eyes a hope that no one there understood. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," murmured a waitress, as if repeating a custom. He would respond with a brief wave, an almost imperceptible smile, and head to the table in the corner. Always the same. Nobody ever sat there. It was as if that song belonged to something sacred, or broken. From the counter, between served coffees and muffled laughter, a young attendant whispered to another, "He always orders the same thing. A black coffee, and that table. They say he's waiting for someone who never comes." The other responds laughing, "Lonely old man. Maybe he doesn't even know what he's waiting for anymore." But there was something more, something no one saw. That man, aged 84, was not just a regular customer. He was a war veteran, one of those who fought bravely, buried friends, and brought home wounds that don't bleed but never heal. But no one there knew about it. They had no idea that that hot coffee was, in fact, a ritual, a reminder, a promise. Have you ever seen someone carry a longing for 6 decades? He carried, in the silence, in the cold, in the still gaze that was lost outside the window, as if expecting that, at any moment, a familiar silhouette would appear among the snowflakes. And every day, at the same time, he repeated the same gesture. He sat down, placed a coin on the table, ordered his black coffee, and looked at the empty chair in front of him. What did he expect? Or who? What you discover now may surprise you, because behind this old man with short steps, there is a story buried in the snow, made of loyalty, sacrifice, and a pact sealed in the middle of a war that the world tried to forget. And if you've ever felt the weight of waiting, or lost someone who promised to come back, then perhaps this story speaks directly to you. Stay with me. Because on that freezing morning, when everything seemed the same as other days, something changed. A child entered, and, with a simple gesture, he interrupted 60 years of silence. She ran in, her face half hidden by a colorful scarf. He was only 10 years old, maybe less. Her grandmother followed her with short steps, stamping her boots on the entrance to remove the snow. The girl looked around, but her eyes stopped in that direction. The corner where the old man, alone, was slowly stirring the coffee with the spoon, as if that small movement was the only gesture that still kept him standing. He didn't even notice when she approached. He was absorbed, perhaps lost in memories that no one else in the world carried but him. The girl touched the back of the empty chair and asked, with the disarming simplicity of a child who has not yet learned to fear silence, "Can I sit here?" The old man looked up. The spoon stopped spinning. For a few seconds, he just looked at her, as if he were seeing a ghost. Or maybe a reunion. Then something rarefied formed at the corners of his mouth. A fragile smile, almost afraid to exist. "Of course. This table was for 2, he said. Nobody understood what happened at that moment. But something changed inside. The atmosphere of the coffee shop felt different, as if an ancient weight had moved, not disappeared, but merely shifted. In the following days, the girl returned. Always at the same time. Always ordering a hot chocolate. And always sitting with him, as if that place were now his too. And little by little, the old man spoke. Simple things first. Then memories. Fragments of a war past, of promises made with blood-stained hands, of friends who stayed behind, of letters that never arrived. He talked about how difficult it was to survive combat, but it was much more difficult to survive on the way back. To oblivion. To solitude. Maybe you know someone like that. Someone who also carries the weight of years and losses in silence. Or maybe you felt this kind of emptiness yourself. If this story is touching something inside you, leave it here in the comments. Talk to me. Tell me what moved you most, what reminded you of someone, or just say that you are there, listening to this story with an open heart. This is how we transform silence into dialogue, pain in memory. And if you feel that this type of content needs to reach more people, like this video, it's not just a button. It's a way of saying that these stories matter, that there is still room for compassion, for listening, for truth. And of course, if you want to continue being part of this journey with us, subscribe to the channel. This helps me continue to bring you stories that deserve to be told, and guarantees that none of them will go unnoticed by you. Because what comes now will show you that even promises broken by time can blossom in an unexpected way. The smell of gunpowder was still fresh in the air. It was their 4th day on enemy soil, and the forest around them seemed to breathe with them, heavy, dark, suffocating. The 2 soldiers walked side by side, their skin marked by mud, their eyes wide not only with fear, but with the knowledge that each step could be the last. One of them was Harris, the same old man from the coffee shop, only in his early 20s, and with his heart exploding with adrenaline and confusion. The other was Miller, his best friend since training camp, the only one who could make jokes in the middle of hell. That night, huddled behind a rock as grenades exploded across the river, they made a deal. A simple but profound pact. If we get out of this alive, every week one of us goes to that cafe on the corner. Just go and wait until the other one appears. Deal, replied Miller, touching Harris's shoulder with his fingertips, as if sealing an invisible truth. The next morning, smoke covered the valley. Screams, shots, shrapnel. And then silence. An awkward silence. Too deep. When Harris opened his eyes, he was covered in dirt and blood, and alone. Miller's body was never found. On the official paperwork, it said, "missing in action." But anyone who has been there knows that this is just a polite way of saying no one had the courage to look for the pieces. The war ended. Those who returned were greeted with flags, speeches, and shaking hands. But inside Harris, nothing came back with him. The battlefield was behind us, but the real fight was just beginning. To continue existing, pretending that everything was fine. He tried to move on with his life. He got married, had children. He worked for decades as a mechanic, silent, dedicated. But there was always an empty chair at the dining table, even when they were all occupied. It was as if that absence had become part of the house. And so, every week, without fail, he would go to the same cafe. I ordered the same black coffee. He sat at the same table in the corner. It was the only thing that made sense. As if, somehow, that kept the promise alive. It was no longer about waiting for Miller to show up. It was about not betraying the pact. It was about honor, about dignity, about remaining faithful even when the whole world forgets. The years passed. The wife left. The children moved to another city. Friends grew old or left. And he stayed. He stayed there, in that forgotten city, with snow in his bones and hope in his chest. Some called it stubbornness, others madness. But deep down, Harris knew what it really was. A testimony. A silent reminder that some promises aren't made with words. They are made with soul. And when the little girl started to appear, with that sparkle in her eyes and the thirst for stories, something inside him stirred. As if her presence gave meaning to what was previously just pain. For the first time in many years, he spoke. He told about the minefield, about the biting cold of the trench, about the moment he thought he would die, and, mainly, about the friend who swore to wait. It's strange how life takes turns. How a 10-year-old child can carry, without knowing it, the strength to heal scars that not even time has been able to close. She knew nothing about war, about loss, about the traumas hidden behind tired eyes, but she listened. And sometimes, that's all anyone needs. Little by little, coffee stopped being just a pain ritual. It has become a meeting point between the past and the present. And Harris, although bent with age, began to walk more upright. Not because the pain was gone, but because finally he was no longer alone. If all of this has affected you in some way, say, true promises don't die. Because when we write, we transform memory into legacy. And this story is not over yet. The years passed like the cold wind that cuts your face on January mornings. Slowly, without warning, but leaving deep marks. Old Harris continued to go to the coffee shop, always wearing the same shabby clothes. A thick wool overcoat, buttons missing here and there. The grey hat that no longer held back the cold so much. Each step seemed to weigh more. The knee creaked. My spine hurt. But he wasn't missing. Never. Not even when the snow was shin deep. Not even when his face froze and his fingers could barely hold the cup. He would arrive, sit in the corner, and look at the door. Just that. The pain of waiting was silent, but alive. And the loneliness. There was no respite. At home, the clock made more noise than the heart. The black and white photos hanging on the wall already had their frames peeling off, as if they were also tired of waiting for smiles that didn't come back. The rocking chair in the corner of the room stopped rocking. The phone didn't ring. The mail only brought bills and advertising. Neighbors from the past have changed, died, or forgotten. And the children were in a hurry. Their lives were moving too fast to fit into a cafe with silence. Harris wrote letters that he never sent. Small notes on pieces of paper, sometimes napkins, where he told how the weather was, how his pain was going, and how he still expected Miller to show up. In one of these letters, he wrote, "Today I dreamed about you." We laughed. It was summer. But I woke up to the sound of the wind hitting the window. Alaska doesn't forgive memories. The pain he felt was not just because of his friend's absence, but because of the absence of meaning. After all, what keeps a promise alive when everything it represents is lost over time? The modern world moves too quickly for those who move slowly, and no one wants to hear old stories when they barely have time to experience new ones. Harris no longer cared about dates. He lived in the rhythm of memory. His existence was an invisible line between the past and the present. The coffee shop was the only place where he still felt like someone, even if it was ignored by the majority. Even if the attendants treated it as part of the furniture. Even if the young people laughed at his habit of looking at the door. But there was an even deeper, more acute pain. The feeling of being transparent. That, even though he existed, he was no longer seen, not even heard, not even remembered. And that tears apart. Because human beings can bear loss, they can even bear grief. But being forgotten is like dying little by little, every day, in front of a fogged-up mirror. He continued writing to Miller, as if time were a slow but faithful messenger. He kept the letters in an old cigar box locked at the back of the closet. Each leaf there was a piece of the soul, a record of the transformation that suffering caused day after day, a testimony to the loyalty that resisted the world's oblivion. One of the coldest mornings that winter, he fell trying to get out of bed. He remained on the floor for hours, unable to scream, with his eyes fixed on the ceiling, remembering the day he last saw Miller. The tears no longer came. They dried up from trying so hard. And even so, after dragging himself to the armchair, taking a breath, putting on his coat and facing the icy street, he went to the cafe. He sat in the corner and waited. But how long can someone wait alone? Perhaps what hurt most wasn't the silence, but the fact that no one else seemed to notice the effort he was making to continue. No medal was useful there. No war photos on the wall mattered. The only thing that was really worth anything anymore was the girl's presence. The girl who arrived without warning, with her cheeks red from the cold and her soul warm with curiosity. She changed everything. Somehow, the look in her eyes said, "I see you." And that was enough. Enough for him to tell you again. Teaching. Living. With her, the cafe stopped being a cell. It became a refuge. A second chance to make sense. And every day, she asked more. He responded. She laughed. He smiled. She drew. He watched. It was as if a piece of the childhood he lost during the war had returned, shy but true. In each conversation, in each story shared, a brick was removed from the invisible wall that separated him from the world. Harris didn't say it, but he knew it. That was his last gift in life. A gift in the form of little people who always arrived at the same time, carrying hope in their eyes and ears, attentive to what most people didn't want to hear. And he, with his hoarse and slow voice, gave everything he had. Time, memory, truth. Write in the comments, I've waited too long too. Because sometimes the pain of waiting is all that brings us together. And sharing it can be the beginning of something no one needs to carry alone anymore. Time seemed frozen at that moment. She, so small in front of that man bent by the years, looked at him with the raw innocence of someone who has not yet learned that the world can be cruel. He hesitated, his eyes full of memories mixed between pain and astonishment, as if that simple question had torn apart 60 years of silence with the delicacy of a whisper. Of course, this table was for two. And at that moment, without anyone noticing, the past gained a voice again. She sat down slowly, adjusting her colorful coat on the chair, as if respecting the space. He didn't ask anything right away. It just stayed there. The big, curious eyes, watching that man with hands stained by time, thick nails, skin as thin as paper. He stirred the coffee with the same spoon, but now the movements were less mechanical. There was something different. As if, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't just talking to the void. In the days that followed, she returned. Always at the same time. Always with a new notebook in hand and a true desire to listen. Old Harris began to speak. First, he told about the coffee shop in the 60s, about the jukebox that played Johnny Cash, about the smell of fresh coffee that he drank with his friend before going to the front. Then, the stories came heavier. He talked about sleeping with a rifle on his lap, about the dry sound of gunshots piercing the night, about seeing young faces being erased by war before they even had a chance to truly smile. The girl didn't look away. He wasn't scared. It was as if she understood, not with her mind, but with her heart. That man didn't want mercy. I just wanted to be remembered. He wanted someone to see what was left of him beyond the fallen skin and the cane. A soldier. A friend. A man who swore to wait. There was a day when she arrived with tears in her eyes. He had fought with his parents. She said no one listened to her at home, that he felt invisible. And there, in the middle of a coffee shop, where silence used to reign supreme, Harris held her hand with surprising strength and said, "You're not alone! And you never will be as long as this table exists." That was the only day he cried in front of her. But like every beautiful reunion, life also has its way of testing even the purest connections. One Tuesday afternoon, she arrived. And he wasn't there. The empty table. The missing cup. The corner of the coffee shop seemed darker, colder, as if time had gone back and erased the last few months. She came back the next day, and the other. Always with the innocent hope that he had just been late. But the days continued to pass, and the chair remained empty. The waitress, with a choked voice, said that he had not given any news, that no one knew anything, that he just didn't come back. It was weeks of waiting. No response, no signal. Until, one morning covered in thick snow, the girl arrived and found an envelope on the table. With her name written in hand, shaky but firm. Next to the envelope, a folded napkin with a name written on the back. A name she had never heard, but which carried all the weight of the world for Harris. Miller. Now that we've come this far, there's something that needs to be said with an open heart. There are encounters that save lives, not because of what they are, but because of what they awaken. This girl didn't know how much she saved that man, and he also didn't know how much he saved her. But this is how the hidden truth of human connection reveals itself, in small gestures, in whispered words, in silent presences. This moment in history is where a lot of things begin to change. And to follow this story with me, write in the comments. There are people who save us without knowing it. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply be there, even without understanding everything. The morning the envelope appeared on the table, the world seemed even quieter than usual. The snow, heavy and soft, muffled all the sounds of the city. It was as if even time had stopped. In respect. The girl arrived with her cheeks burned from the cold, and her steps hurried, but she slowed down as soon as she saw his absence from afar. Again. Another day when the chair was empty. Another day when black coffee was not ordered. The waiter, upon seeing her standing at the door, just pointed with his gaze. "Is there something for you?" She walked to the table, her hands shaking even with her thick gloves. The envelope was simple, yellowed, with her name written in handwriting. Shaky but firm handwriting. The paper still held the smell of coffee and a little of the warmth of whoever had left it there. Sat down. He took a deep breath, and it opened. Inside, a single sheet, written on both sides. The handwriting faltered, but the emotion was so clear that the paper almost pulsed in his hands. The letter began like this. Small. If you're reading this, it's because my body finally got tired. But my heart, my heart would still have 1,000 stories to tell you. Maybe more than time allowed me. You arrived like someone who didn't want anything, but you gave me everything. It gave me listening, laughter, hope. It gave me reason to keep showing up here, not just for Miller, but for myself. You gave color back to my gray days. And even without understanding everything I experienced, he understood what mattered most. That the promise was never about presents, but about loyalty. The girl couldn't contain her tears. It wasn't a noisy cry, the kind that cracks in your chest. It was the kind of cry that flows quietly, but carries the weight of everything that has been experienced and lost. On paper, he continued, I waited for my best friend for 60 years, and he never came. But I don't regret a single day, because waiting is also loving. And you know what? He never promised me to come back. We promised each other, if one of us survives, may the table never be empty. Yao, and today, as I write this, I understand that you are part of that promise. You kept my soul sitting here, even when my body wanted to leave. Along with the letter, folded carefully, was a napkin with a name written on the back, James T. Miller. Nothing more. No date, no number. Just the name. As if, finally, it could be delivered. Recognized. Released. It was as if that piece of paper was a key. A seal. The last piece of a story sown with pain, hope, and a faith that is almost impossible to explain. The name there carried battles that were never told, memories that never had an audience, and a friendship that withstood war, death, time. The girl kept the envelope in her coat and remained there for hours. He ordered a black coffee. Didn't take it. He just watched the steam rise from the cup and disappear into the air, as if that gesture was sacred. As if, somehow, he was still sitting there, looking at her with that half-smile, like he did the first few times. In the following days, she returned. Always with the same coat. Always at the same time. Sometimes with a book. Others just with silence. And, little by little, the table in the corner became no longer just the old man's table. People in the coffee shop started to notice, wondering, to remember. Because the girl told about him, about the pact, about the promise. And something started to change. Little by little, other people began to sit with her. First, a widowed lady. Then, a slow-speaking man. A grandson bringing his grandfather. And the table, once a symbol of absence, became a space for reunion. A space where time stopped for listening to happen. It's curious how a story can sew souls together. How a seemingly lonely journey can actually be setting the stage for something much bigger. The transformation was there, visible in the details. In the cup that was never forgotten. In the chair that was never empty for many days in a row. On the small sign that the coffee shop had made and placed next to the table. This table is for those who don't forget. It was there, in that forgotten corner of Alaska, that a pact made between two soldiers planted something that neither time nor death could uproot. The permanence of memory. The hidden truth that fidelity doesn't need a stage or an audience, it just needs a heart willing to remember. Write it in the comments. I know what it's like to wait in silence. Because if you've ever saved a place for someone, even when everyone said it was useless, then that's your story too. For a few days, the pain seemed to swallow everything. His absence was heavy in the air, as if it had been trapped in the cafeteria's curtains, in the smell of freshly brewed coffee, in the creaking of the wooden chair in the corner of the room. It was difficult to accept that constant presence, so strong in its fragility, had disappeared without saying goodbye. But the girl didn't let that end. She wasn't old enough to understand all the losses in the world, but she had a sensitivity that many adults had already buried along with their hopes. And it was with this sensitivity that she decided to keep coming back. No obligations, no big speeches. He would just arrive, sit at the same table, leave his coat on the hook, order the same black coffee, even if he didn't like it, and look out the window, as he did. She no longer expected him to return. She was waiting for something she couldn't even name. Maybe the memory. Maybe continuity. Maybe the chance to not let that promise fade into the oblivion that consumes so many stories. As the weeks went by, other people started to notice. First, a lady with very white hair, who always passed by the door but never entered. One day, when he saw the girl alone at the table in the corner, he stopped, looked, and he entered. He sat on the other side. I didn't say anything. She just took a small tissue out of her bag, wiped her eyes, and stayed there for 10 minutes. After that, she started to come back. Soon, a man with a double cane approached. He was known for walking around the square, mumbling and cursing pigeons. But when he saw the girl at that table, holding a notebook with the name Mr. Harris on the cover, he changed course. Said, "That old man was my neighbor. He never spoke to me. But now I understand why." And sat down. He spoke of the war he himself lived through, of a woman he loved and never saw again, of a letter he wrote and never had the courage to send. He cried for the first time in years. The girl listened. I always listened. And when he didn't understand something, he asked, but he never interrupted, never rushed. The café, previously just a place of passage, began to become a point of arrival. As if that old man's story had revealed a hidden truth. Everyone carries someone who didn't come back. Everyone has an empty table inside them. And so, unintentionally, a community was born there. A silent movement of memories and belonging. People started bringing objects. An antique medallion. A crumpled note. A portrait torn in half. Each item, a souvenir. Each story told, a wound that breathed. And at that table, which for decades was a symbol of lonely waiting, now something no one expected was sprouting. Connection. The cafe employees, previously oblivious, began to understand. They reserved the table with a small wooden sign. Mesa du Harris. His cup, stained with age, was placed there as a relic. Untouchable. And next to it, the folded envelope. The girl left it there on purpose. He said it was for anyone who wanted to read it, for those who needed to feel that it was still worth waiting. This small attitude became a gesture of impact. People came from other neighborhoods, from other cities. They wanted to know the story of the man who waited, of the pact that stood the test of time, from the child who heard. Many carried flowers, others just silence. But they all came out different, as if something had been rearranged inside. And that's where the turning point comes in, because when pain is transformed into sharing, it becomes a bridge. And the bridge leads to the other. It leads to what remains of us as human. The girl, without knowing it, began a journey of collective healing. She brought to light a forgotten truth in such busy times. No one wants to be remembered for having won, but rather for having resisted what almost made them give up. The beautiful thing was that she never told the story as a tragedy. He always spoke as if it were a living lesson. She said Harris was her best old man, and that he taught her more about courage than any school book. Once, he drew him sitting at the table with a calm smile and his eyes closed, and in the corner of the paper he wrote, "Some people rest after finding peace. Others rest because they have become peace." This drawing was framed and placed on the wall of the cafeteria. And soon, others began to send their art, their texts, their stories. The cafe became a wall of memories, of new beginnings, of recognition. And it's curious how something so small turns into a legacy. Because it wasn't about the war, not even about time, not even about the pain. It was about the decision not to let the promise die, the mentality of continuing even when no one sees it, the courage to be a seed, even without knowing if anyone will harvest the fruit. Write it in the comments. I carry a table inside me. Because sometimes, all we need is someone to see what we've been keeping silent for years. Time passed like snow that melts without a fuss. And with him, the girl grew up. That child who arrived with hair messed up by the wind and eyes shining with curiosity now entered the cafeteria with longer steps, a calm expression, but still with the same lightness of someone who knew how to listen. She continued going to the table in the corner, as she always did. But now, those who sat with her were others. New faces, tired bodies, stories too old to fit into one life. The man that afternoon was over 90 years old. Skin marked by time, hands that shook not only because of age, but because of what they were carrying. He had a folded photo in his pocket. It was him and a friend in the desert, torn uniforms, young smiles in a harsh setting. When he handed the portrait to the young woman, his eyes filled with water. "That was the last time we laughed together," he said with a choked voice. And there, in front of her, he told her everything. The bombing, the fear, the guilt of having survived. He had never talked about it with anyone. Not even with his wife. Not even with the children. But with her, feeling that almost sacred space at the table, he managed it. She didn't interrupt. I just listened. I wrote it down in an old notebook with worn edges and full of names scratched out by hand. It was as if he was collecting lost souls with the tip of his pen. A rescue. A record. A silent way of giving back to these men. And also to herself, the certainty that no one will be forgotten if there is someone willing to remember. The days turned into weeks. The weeks in years. And the table, once a symbol of solitary waiting, became a symbol of welcome. War widows, grandchildren looking for stories about their grandparents, young volunteers, retired soldiers, and even tourists who heard rumors about the Café of Promise passed by. The cafe was no longer just a commercial place. It was a sanctuary of memories, a place where the past found a voice and the present learned to listen. The oldest waiter, who previously cleaned that table in a hurry, now did so with reverence. It was he who said, with pride in his eyes, "This is the table of hope." And there wasn't a day when the soft sound of the spoon touching the porcelain didn't mix with the light buzz of sincere conversations that echoed there. Nothing there was forced. It was all true. Every tear, every smile, every silence. And it is exactly at this point that life shows its most beautiful way of honoring pain. It transforms. Because what started with a tired man, sitting in a cold chair, waiting for a friend who never returned, became an invisible chain that united strangers around the same hidden truth. Everyone needs to be heard. Everyone has a story they want to be told. And every story deserves a chair, a cup of coffee, and someone willing to not leave mid-sentence. This girl, now almost an adult, became the guardian of what no one else had the courage to carry. She never called herself anything, but it was. She was the guardian of promises, of bonds, of open scars. It was the link between what was and what could still be. And maybe that explains why she continued there. Even when the days got heavy. Even when the stories made her cry on the way home. Even when the longing for Mr. Harris was too strong. Because she understood. He understood that true friendships never die. They just change faces. And continue teaching loyalty. It's not about time. It's about delivery. About keeping the decision to be present alive, even when everything around falls apart. About holding pain tightly, not to hide it, but to show it, because it is through pain that we learn the real value of human connection. And maybe you're listening to all this right now, and you feel like somewhere inside you there's that table too. Maybe there's someone you've been waiting for, or someone you wish you had waited longer for. Maybe you are carrying memories that no one ever wanted to hear. Or maybe you're ready to listen to someone. If so, write it in the comments. I also keep stories that no one knows. Because in the end, what makes us stronger is not what we can forget, but what we choose to remember together with someone. If you've made it this far, it's because this story spoke to you on some level. Maybe it reminded you of someone who passed away, of a promise that marked your life, or just awakened that good longing for something that still lives inside your chest. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me until the end. If this really touched you, leave a comment below with the phrase, "That memory is mine too." This way I will know that you walked with me through every detail of this journey. And you can be sure these comments make this space more than a channel. They make it a place where memories find an echo. Also enjoy and leave your like on this video. It's a simple gesture, but it strengthens this connection that we created and helps these stories reach more people who also need to remember that they are not alone. And if you feel that this type of content has value, subscribe to the channel here. It will be a pleasure to have you around for the next stories. There's a lot I still want to share with you. In fact, there's a video here that complements everything we experienced today. Click and stay with me there. The next story is already waiting for you.